And let's keep in mind, too, as far as it relates to CBDCs, that it's very possible to have programmable, surveillable money, not just issued by the central bank, but also the big Wall Street banks,
That's
which is
right.
exactly what people like Jamie Dimon have talked about
That's
doing
that's
with
right.
their JPM coin
That's
and
right.
things like that. So even though Trump has disavowed CBDCs, he
Yes,
certainly hasn't disavowed programmable, surveillable money. And
that's
in the
right.
United States, it was always most likely to come not from the Fed, but from the Wall Street banks, who in the United States own the Federal Reserve System. The most powerful bank in the Federal Reserve System is the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. Its largest shareholder is JP Morgan.
That's right.
In this recent interview on the Jimmy Dore Show with Whitney Webb, we learn about powerful players in the financial industry and their drive that could potentially destroy our privacy with digital ID. At the time of this discussion, Bitcoin is trading at $67,000, with a under 1% decrease change in the last 24 hours and 5% increase change in the last 7 days. Webb dives into the concerning developments surrounding central bank digital currencies, CBDCs, and digital IDs, highlighting the risks they pose to personal freedom and financial autonomy. She discusses how companies like Palantir are involved in these technologies and the potential consequences for individuals. Before we dive into this discussion, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this channel. Now let's hear more from Whitney Webb on the Jimmy Dore Show.
None of these candidates are going to get in the White House and magically fix everything. It's up to Americans to take individual responsibility for our lives and try and make our communities and ourselves and our families as resilient as possible for all this crazy stuff that's starting to happen, whether it's, problems with the economy, another war, supply chain issues, cyber attacks, whatever. I mean, obviously things are going to get really crazy, and we need to be able to rely on each other and our communities and not rely on the government or big tech to come in and solve all our problems. Big tech wants to lead us to a world where everything we do is dependent on our digital ID. I think part of it's factional, but also keep in mind too that there's a lot of stuff, I would argue that some political stuff that happens is there to distract us. If you look at Peter Thiel, he's a big Republican donor. Eric Schmidt is a big Democrat donor, and they both essentially, run the American faction on the Bilderberg Conference together. So they agree on a lot more than they don't at the end of the day. And I think they like to distract us with a lot of this stuff. And Trump is, most people know him for being, before he was president, for being a reality TV star and for being on, on wrestling and all of that stuff. He knows how to be photogenic, and, in the first campaign, he was pretty funny at times, and he knows how to make, regular Americans like him. But I think people should distance them, not just focus so much on the persona that he's developed, but also on his policies. And so I think some of it's factional, but I think also, considering that Trump was really a big disappointment for his base in significant ways the first time around, how do you rebuild trust in a person and get people to have all that energy behind a candidate again, specifically when he's going to, talking about putting Jamie Dimon in charge of the Treasury and stuff, and doing things that are clearly not populist this time around. And, I think you have to convince they've sort of created this paradigm where, if you're targeted by, certain factions of the so-called deep state, then it automatically means that you're you're good for Americans and you're going to uphold freedom and all of this. And I don't think that's necessarily true. I think that's sort of a false dichotomy that's been made to some extent. I think some of the stuff that maybe that has been used to target Trump and all of that, maybe some of it's inorganic, not necessarily talking about the weekend's events, but maybe some of these court cases and some of these other things. I think it's very possible, because this is a guy that helped lock down the country, gave Fauci awards, has promoted Operation Warp Speed the whole time. His base hated that. So how do you re-energize them and make them like it again, like him again? We have to keep in mind too that, Trump has powerful backers that like what he did the first time and have wanted him back in power. And I think people, should keep this kind of stuff in mind. I mean, maybe it sounds.
As we just heard Whitney Webb discuss powerful corrupted players, let's hear her explain more about companies like Palantir and the risks around CBDCs and digital ID. Webb highlights Palantir's deep involvement in developing technologies that could be used for mass surveillance and control. She points out that Palantir, co-founded by Peter Thiel, has close ties to intelligence agencies and is positioning itself as a key player in the implementation of CBDCs and digital ID systems. Webb warns that these technologies could lead to unprecedented levels of financial control and surveillance, potentially allowing authorities to monitor and restrict citizens' spending based on various factors. Now let's listen to what Whitney Webb on the Jimmy Dore Show.
They make it very clear that domestic terrorists, their definition of it includes people on the left and the right, people that oppose all forms of capitalism. That includes the left's favored stakeholder capitalism or crony capitalism, anything in that, people that are extreme environmentalists, people that oppose perceived government overreach. All of this is considered enough to get you to be considered a threat by the federal government. And this is a national security state apparatus out of control. And I would argue that, with Trump and JD Vance, they are trying to sell themselves as anti-establishment, potentially libertarian and populist. And that is not what these companies are. The fact that Trump is taking money from Palantir and Palantir co-founders, whether it's Peter Thiel or Joe Lonsdale, is very alarming. And their potential influence on the vice presidential pick is also very alarming. Because if people care about reining in the surveillance state or stopping the war on domestic terror, they should be outraged by this, because ultimately what these campaigns are is a way to stifle dissent. And that's what they've been from the very beginning. When you look back at their how it started, during the Iran-Contra era, very alarming stuff. And so I think the more people know about this, the more we can do to stop it. Out of it is finding other platforms or finding ways to try and be as anonymous online. But unfortunately, we're being led to a world in PayPal and some other Thiel-connected companies, and really most of big tech and the biggest banks in the country are part of this effort at the World Economic Forum called the Partnership Against Cybercrime, along with the FBI and the Secret Service and Israeli intelligence. And their goal is to have you have a digital ID in order to access the internet. To stop cybercrime and to stop hacking. And they define cybercrime as speech they don't like. But I think someone like Peter Thiel is hugely influential, and I think he's not talked about enough. I mean, the billionaires like him have so much money to spend on PR and to spend on buying up influencers to try and make them look like something they're not. I mean, Peter Thiel has convinced people he's a libertarian when he's given the CIA, the national security state, the most powerful weapon in its arsenal, Palantir, not to mention some of the other companies that he's helped develop, including one that he funded alongside Jeffrey Epstein, that is taking over 911 call centers all over the country, called Carbine 911. There's all this stuff happening. People need to know what Peter Thiel is actually doing, and be aware of what they're using the internet for when you interact with it, and try and take steps to mitigate it. But ultimately, I think they're trying to get us, Silicon Valley runs both political parties.
That's right.
They're essentially our de facto government because
Yes.
they've merged with the national security
Yes.
state. All of the big tech companies are military and intelligence contractors. It's not just Palantir, but they're a big one, and they put you on the naughty list, right? But essentially they all do it, and this is really the people that run our government, and they're leading us into a technocratic, totalitarian hellhole. And the only way to get out of it at some point is to not be dependent on their services, and they've made us dependent on their services. So I think it's high time why we can still talk freely, at least on some platforms, to use that to develop solutions and develop alternatives that don't involve these people, don't involve these billionaires. And it's another interesting thing too, that all of the big Silicon Valley oligarchs, every single one of them had a relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. Why is that? Why did Larry Page disappear when he was subpoenaed as part of the JP Morgan Epstein USVI case? Why was Sergey Brin and Elon Musk subpoenaed? Why did Jeff Bezos and Ghislaine Maxwell have such a close relationship? Why did Reid Hoffman hang out with Jeffrey Epstein all the time? Peter Thiel had meetings with Jeffrey Epstein and co-funded companies with him.
So
what's going on here?
To watch this full interview, check out the link in the description. In this eye-opening discussion, Whitney Webb exposes the potential dangers of CBDCs, digital IDs, and the involvement of companies like Palantir in developing these systems. She warns about the loss of financial privacy and the risk of government overreach in controlling citizens' spending habits. We would love to hear your thoughts on some questions. How might Palantir's involvement in CBDCs and digital ID systems impact your daily life and privacy? What safeguards should be put in place to prevent the misuse of these powerful technologies by governments and corporations? Thank you for tuning in to Only the Savvy. If you enjoyed this discussion, please subscribe, like, and share our video for more engaging content diving into the innovative world of decentralized technologies.